name's Nick Prefontaine, and you could find me at my website, which is nickprefontaine.com. And I'm going to be sharing a lot of my experience today, my trauma from when I was growing up, when I was 14. So I'm looking forward to it.
Perfect. So let's jump right into it. Let's start from the very beginning and discover what the genesis of that trauma is. So you mentioned at age 14. What is it that you went through and experienced at that age?
Sure. So terrain, I was at ski club. I was on my way to the mountain with my friends, and this mountain, it was for ski club. This mountain was, so we got dismissed a little bit early, which is always exciting as an eighth grader, to get dismissed a little bit early so we could get a jump on it. On the ride there, my friends and I had all brought our snowboard gear on the bus to get ready so we wouldn't miss a precious moment once we got to the mountain. And when I was getting ready, I realized that I forgot something that I usually, not all the time, but usually brought to that mountain because it was a little bit bigger than I was used to. That's my helmet. I didn't think anything was going to happen. Nothing ever did happen. I'd be safe. I'd be careful. Everything would be fine. Got to the mountain, and because we were ready, we got ready on the bus, headed right for the chairlift. And terrain on the ride up, we noticed that it was very icy because it had been raining. So people were wiping out everywhere. Needless to say, it wasn't our first time on a snowboard. My friends and we were pretty experienced, and I was just chomping at the bit. The chairlift went right over the terrain park where all of the jumps were. And it went right over the biggest jump in the terrain park. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh yeah, that's what I'm hitting. That has my name all over it. So I got to the top, took a breath of that crisp winter air, and confidently charged towards that jump with all my speed. Going up to the jump, I caught the edge of my snowboard on the snow going up the jump, and that threw me off balance. And that's really the last thing that I remember. So I was told that I landed on my head. I wasn't wearing a helmet. Later, I learned I pieced together certain details of that day based on eyewitness accounts, people that were there, and my family and the doctors and everyone. So I later learned that my goggles were the only protection that my head had. They told me that I wore some pretty thick goggles with a lot of padding. They told me, Terrain, that not only did they brace my initial impact, they kept bracing my impact as I rolled down the mountain after that initial impact. So really, you can say that those goggles are part of the reason why I'm here today. And there's always three things that I like to point to, and each equally important. So they wanted to bring a helicopter to the mountain to rush me to the hospital because of the severity of my injury, and they couldn't because it was too windy. So they sent in an ambulance, and out of the all the paramedics in the county, there was only one who could intubate on the spot, and I needed that to be able to breathe. He was one of the paramedics that showed up to the mountain that day. Once I got to the hospital, I was out for the count. They said based on the impact alone, I probably was going to be out for 7 to 10 days at a minimum. So I was resting in a coma in the intensive care unit, unable to communicate with anyone. And at least in the early days, my parents, my immediate family, were the only ones that were allowed in that room. If you can picture that, if you can imagine that. They were in my room, and it was no fault of the doctors. They just walked in the room and they started sharing. Well, here's what happened in Nick, and my mom stopped them. And up until a couple weeks ago, I used to say my parents stopped them. Then a couple weeks ago, I was on my dad's podcast, and he stopped me. He said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! I love to take the credit, but it wasn't me. It was your mom." So my mom stopped them, and she said, "No, no, not in front of him." because she understood that even though I was in a coma out for the count, I was still taking in information. So they made she, not they, made the doctor step outside my room. And then once they were outside my hospital room in the ICU, that's where they shared the news with them. They said Nick's been in a serious accident, suffered a traumatic brain injury. He's in a coma, partially induced, because they didn't want the swelling in my brain, which was already at a point where it was like right up on the edge. If it increased anymore, I would die. So they didn't want me to wake up after being in a coma and freak out and be like, what are you guys doing? Who are you? How did I get here? What's happened to me? So it was a partially induced coma. They said, look, Nick's in a partially induced coma. We don't know how long he's going to be out, if he's even going to come back. And when he does come back, when and if he does come back, there's no guarantee that he's probably not going to be able to walk, talk, or eat on his own again. My parents took the information, they took in the information, just took a deep breath. And then because all of this was outside my realm, like subconsciously or like I was in a coma, so it wasn't a conscious thing, but because that information didn't even have the opportunity to get into my subconscious, my unconscious, whatever you want to call it, I was able to treat it like any other situation, like I had through my entire life up until that point. And that was once I came out of the coma, and I was in the coma for 3 weeks. I really don't remember a month because it was a partially induced coma, as I said. So they had to slowly take me off the drugs. A month after my accident, when I got my wits about me, if you will, I just, because that information train didn't get in, I was just able to get up, keep working, keep getting better every day. And it was along this time that now remember, I couldn't walk, talk, or eat again. So this was before I could talk. However, I overheard my parents talking to my doctors and therapists. And they said, all right, what do we have to do to make sure Nick makes a full recovery? And I heard in the back of my head, no, you're going to run out of the hospital. So then running out of the hospital became our common goal, what everyone was working towards. And this kind of perfectly introduces the support system that I had. So unknowingly, I was utilizing a system to not only make a full recovery, but run out of the hospital. That's a STEP system, and that's what I teach and speak about to this day. STEP is an acronym, and I'll give you guys a 10,000-foot view just so you get an idea. It stands for support. You have to make sure that you have the support of your family and friends around you. And this is going to have you falling back on relationships that you built prior to your setback. T is trust. You have the trust that once you take your first step, your next step is always going to be available to you, and then follow it. This also has to do with following that voice in the back of your head, and your calling inside of you, which call what you want, God, the universe, the unconscious. However, I've always been able to tune in and listen to that voice in the back of my head. And later in my life, it led me to what I'm doing today, which is launching my company, Common Goal, and speaking and help out other individuals that are in the midst of their own trauma, life challenge, or crisis. So T is trust. E is energy. Energy, maintaining your energy allows your body's natural ability to be able to heal itself. So unbeknownst to me, and this is important, unbeknownst to me, my parents had someone come in and perform Reiki on me when I was in the coma. So they were always being proactive, and this is back in 2003. So this wasn't mainstream. However, they were always being proactive with natural therapies and treatments and things like that. And then also, with energy, we talk about the fact that medication, it interrupts the body's natural ability to be able to heal itself. So after I came out of that coma, I had a lot of drugs pumped into me to help keep me alive, and I needed that. Um, I find that especially nowadays, it's so polarizing. You're either one 100% or the other 100%, which is medical and medicine and like doctors 100%, and you don't believe in natural treatments, natural therapies, or you're 100% natural and you don't believe in any kind of medication or anything. However, I think you have success, and the reason I've had success, when you blend these two together, you need to do both of them. So I think, in the way I can illustrate this terrain, when I came out of my coma and I was starting to work and do the double sessions of physical, occupational, and speech and everything like that. This was before I got clearance to walk. So during the night, I would get up and I couldn't get anyone's attention. So I would like hobble myself over to the bathroom and go to the bathroom. And the doctors were like, well, we can't have that. And they wanted to like drug me. They were like, well, we need to give him this medication so he sleeps well at night. And my parents are like, no, just tell him not to do that. You don't have to drug him. You don't have to give him medication. So just tell him not to do that. So that's an example. I remember right around this time, very early on in my recovery, that I could overhear my parents saying to the doctors, and I decided that I was going to run out of the hospital. Right around this time, um, they were long days for me. Like I said, I had double sessions of physical, occupational, and speech therapy. So I would need help from my physical therapist to shower again, to learn how to shower again. And I mean, picture that. I had to learn that, as simple as the water comes before the soap, if you can believe that. Then I
And
started
Nick,
my,
let me
yeah.
let me ask you a question in regards to that. What you shared regarding your journey from when you had your injury up until you started to recover, it reminded me of someone I used to work with about maybe 15 years ago. This person ended up in a coma because of there was a disagreement and they got into a fight and they had a brain injury similar to yours and they're comatose. I think they were comatose, if I remember correctly, for a number of months. And they had to relearn everything as well. They had to relearn how to speak, to live their life, basically, to navigate the world. And when I had conversations with him, it was quite interesting to see that there was a sense of fear from him, not because he was scared of the world per se, but because he was afraid that the life that he remembered may not be the life that he gets to continue going forward post recovery. So for you, as you went through the S of steps, the T, the E, and then we can get to the P, was there a sense to you or a thought in your mind thinking, my life is going to be totally different after this recovery? Or were you determined to maintain your life as much as possible from what you remember before this situation?
Very interesting way you phrase that. So I really appreciate the question. I think at the time when I was going through it, I looked at everything like, so after being in a coma, and then I was only in the hospital, like inpatient rehab, the ICU, in the coma and inpatient rehab, for less than 90 days. So I looked at everything like, no, I'm fine. I'm back. There's nothing wrong. But I'm never the same. It's two different people. So the person, Nick, before my accident, and the accident and then Nick after the accident. If I were, it's two different people. And I think I was holding on a little too much. And that's part of the fact that I wanted to, like, it was a goal, it was an ideal to shoot for during my recovery, that I want to get back to, as best I can, to my life from prior to the accident. It was kind of an ideal to shoot for. However, I realized all these years later, Terrain, that it's two different people. And I think a lot of people, especially that suffer trauma, setback, or challenge, will start to get in trouble where they'll beat themselves up because they'll compare their self after the injury, the accident, or trauma. They'll compare themselves now to before the trauma. And that's not fair. I've had that discussion with several people that I've worked with one on one. Like, one of the clientele I work with is people that are going through like a death or a life change in the family, like a husband had a stroke or something like that, where they're caught up and they're in their head comparing, well, it's not, he's getting there. He's almost like he used to be, but he's not like he used to be. And I kind of bring the awareness to, no, it's two different people. And if you're doing that, that's not fair to him or her. It's really not fair to them, because all you can do is get a little bit better. And I still do this to this day. Get better, focus on improving a little bit every day. You can only compare yourself to yesterday. You can't compare yourself to before your setback or accident.
Why do you think we do that? Because you have the clients and you're helping them. So what is the commonality that is driving that comparison between Nick, or let's use me, Terrain before the accident and Terrain after the accident?
Well, I mean, I think it's human nature. Every one of us, whether we had a trauma or an accident or not, is like, thinks back nostalgically to how the past used to be. Oh, it was so nice in the good old days. Well, the truth was, no, it wasn't. You're better today than you were 10 years ago or 5 years ago. You're It's just, I don't know. It has to do with your, it's human nature. I think it's the mind playing tricks on you, and that's why I use, and I don't usually share this on interviews, but I use something called Ho'oponopono to constantly be in the moment. And uh, the book that got me started on this whole methodology and everything is called Zero Limits by Dr. Joe Vitale and Dr. Hugh Len. So I don't want to go into detail. I'm not a like certified practitioner of Ho'oponopono or anything like that. No one's paying me for it. It's just helped me so much in my life to stay in the present moment and be available for others. Thank you for bringing it up, though. I really appreciate the question. And back to STEP, just so I can finish that. So the P is for persistence, and persistence. Once you've taken your first step, keep getting up every day and taking your next step, no matter how small. This is going to have you building an unstoppable momentum, at least in the first 90 days. If you're doing something little it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be changing the world, like 12 or 13-hour days. However, if you're doing something every day, you're building an unstoppable momentum that will carry you through the hard times. So that was a system that I unknowingly used to run out of the hospital. If you fast forward a little bit, on that day, less than 90 days later, 86 days later to be exact, I ran out of the hospital. However, it wasn't like my work was done. I had to continue to go to outpatient therapy for another 6 months, along with being tutored all summer long, 5 days a week, in order to continue on to high school with the rest of my classmates. And I know, what eighth grader doesn't want to be tutored all summer long, 5 days a week? So it was, I could go on and on about stories from there that I've never shared with anyone. My neighbor and I, he would always show up and knock on the door early and try to get me out early so we could go and hang out. But it was really an interesting time. And I think right here I'll take a breath if you have any more questions.
Absolutely. I look back on my life and I used to play a lot of sports and I haven't had a lot of injuries, but I had one. I had a cracked wrist, which definitely doesn't compare to like a brain injury or something along those lines. And I look at when you mentioned the step system that you use, the support, the teach, the energy, and the persistence. And I look back on that injury. I didn't have a comparative moment, maybe because I was so young. Like I'm in my 30s now. And when that happened, I must have been like 18, where I got hit into the bleachers and my wrist hit one of the metal poles and it like cracked it. And then I had to rehab it and things along those lines. But one thing I did notice in what you were sharing is that that approach can be used for other types of trauma. Like if I'm going through like an emotional injury, or a mental health injury, you want the support, you want the teaching, right? You want the energy, you want to be persistent. So when I look at what you've gone through, it's like it could be expanded to help so many people in so many different ways because we may not have the physical injury, but we may have an injury in another way. So when you're helping your clients and they're coming to you with a physical injury, do you sometimes discover that there's something else going on as well, maybe from an emotional aspect, a mental aspect as well?
I think, all right, so the the step system and what I do isn't, I mean, it's helping people through trauma, life challenge, or crisis get through to the other side and be able to thrive with the rest of their lives. However, all of that is, and you just alluded to it in your question, is it's all up here. It's all in the mind, in between the ears, and um, it can be applied. Support, trust, energy, and persistence. It can be applied to anything. The way that I've kind of applied it. So I was, if you let me answer the question by telling a story. I think this will really help. So um after, it was just like, it was a little surreal to me that I had a mentor pointed out to me recently that like within the last 3 years, that she said, wait a minute, so you finished your rehab. Like, I had to go to rehab for 6 months after I ran out of the hospital and everything like that, and then only 18 months later you got your start in business, which was knocking on pre-foreclosure doors, or notice people that have received a notice of default letter from the bank. So I would, meaning they had missed a few payments or up to 10 to 12 payments and the bank still hadn't foreclosed. So I would go there when I was 16. Um, I couldn't drive with anyone in the car, but I could go and knock on these people's doors, being only just getting my license. And I would go and just knock on their door and be a bird dog, if you will, and try to set up appointments for our investor to meet with them the following week about buying their house. And I did that throughout the rest of my high school career. Then I got my real estate license, got into real estate, and then after several years of being a successful realtor, I started helping my dad as an investor with his marketing of his properties and working with his buyers and everything. And all throughout my life, Terrain, I've always had this voice in the back of my head that's saying, and I've always done it naturally. It's what I've done my whole life. Like, yeah, that's great. No matter what I'm doing. Yeah, that's great. But what you really need to be doing is helping other individuals that are going through trauma get through to the other side and thrive with the rest of their lives. And a big part of that is telling your story from stage. I've always had that in the back of my head. I reached out, someone saw me speak in 2019 and said, if you're ever interested in fine tuning your message, I can introduce you to a few people and help you do that to kind of take it to another level. And I hung on to her card for a year and a half, and I finally reached out to her and said, okay, I'm ready. since I've reached out to her, and it was almost 3 years ago. It was almost 3 years ago I reached out to her for the first time. My mentor, Trisha Brooke. Since I reached out to her, there has been no voice. No voice in the back of my head. So what that's evidence to me is that I'm doing exactly what I'm put on this earth to do.
So when you're looking at the clients that you have, do you see yourself in them?
Oh, 100%.
How does
100%.
that,
That's
how does
why.
that, so the reason why I asked that question, you know why I asked that question is I coach men and women on the emotional and mental health aspect. And there's many times where I come across some clients and I see pieces of themselves that remind me of me. And it's very inspiring because if I had the system that they have now, maybe I'll be further along. But it sounds like you had your system from the very beginning when it came to your parents, and they were instrumental in that. And they're very protective of you as well, because you gave the example that when they're talking about news that could potentially be viewed as maybe not as welcoming or not as good, it was away from you, right? It was outside the room, it was in the corridors, things of that nature. So when you see yourself in your clients, how does that make you feel knowing that you're playing a role in their progression, similar to how your support system did for you?
It's really, I mean, that's interesting. Interesting question. So I think it's really, to me, it's exciting that I get to help other people, that almost as if like I'm blessed to have this happen to me. Like if I were to go back, I wouldn't change a thing. Now my mom says she would change a thing. She, because I put my parents through a lot. However, I wouldn't change a thing, and that's because over the years, whatever I'm doing, um, it doesn't matter. I always, when people get in an accident is or a trauma, automatically, oh, you got to talk to Nick. And I've always just naturally helped them and shared the step system with them unknowingly. So I had to have my mentor reflect it back to me to really articulate it what it is, and to put it, write it down on paper and start to be able to speak it and teach it. However, I've done it throughout my whole life, so that's what I've done. Um, I've always helped people that are going through trauma. I mentioned someone that she had her husband have a stroke. I worked with her for gosh, the better part of a year and a half, to help her kind of adjust to life after that. Um, the reason that I do it, and the reason that I've always loved to do it, is because I've been there, so I can help them get through to the other side and to be able to thrive with the rest of their life. And I feel like that's where I've gotten to. And of course, I'm always, as I shared earlier, Train, I'm always trying to get better every day. I'm always trying to improve and get better every day. However, I really feel like I am past it. And to give you an idea of where this came up. So where this came up, so going through my accident when I was 14 and running out of the hospital, and then it was just people say, yeah, how'd you do it? And I'm like, I don't know, I just did it because I was 14. And it was just, I feel like it's just something that happened to me when I was 14. However, I think it became real to me in 2012, the step system, that is, and realizing that I had a message to help other people. 2012, I developed a voice issue. So I was looking everywhere. I was going to my natural practitioner. I was going to an allergist. I was going to all these different specialists, speech therapy on my own again. And no one could pinpoint what it was. They all said I was fine. Oh no, you're fine. It's probably in your head. I just knew something wasn't right. And I knew that I had caused damage to my voice by you're supposed to, all right, one of the things in like real estate, in like sales or prospecting for real estate, is you have to chant your scripts to get your energy up. And so you're able to transfer that energy when you're on the phone. Well, I always like to take everything to the extreme. That's who I am as a person. That's why I'm where I am today, I guess you could say. I interpreted that as, oh, okay, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to scream my scripts. And not only will this get my energy up, but it will really reinforce my scripts so I know them in my bones. And after doing this for 7 months, yes, 7 months, um, I was doing it one day before I got on the phone to prospect, and my voice gave out and I started laughing. And I caught my reflection in the glass where it was working was an office with a little glass that looked out on the rest of the office. I caught my reflection in the glass and I was like, that's it. That's why my voice sounds different. So I stopped doing the screaming and thought my voice would go back to normal. Well, it didn't. And I looked for answers for a year, couldn't figure it out. Finally wound up in a voice specialist office in Boston in August of 2013. And that's where I had to start getting Botox injections because it was almost like it was hard to get the words out. Like I had a lot of tension right in here. And I had to get Botox injections in conjunction with working with our higher level voice, like voice trained voice therapists, like higher than just a regular speech therapist. And after having that and getting those Botox injections like 2 to 3 times, sometimes more a year, um, it finally worked its way out of my system. And the last Botox injection I had was February 13th of 2020. Um, Going through that experience was, I think I'm more proud of that than I am my accident because it took 8 or 9 years. And then I realized that, oh shit, oh excuse me, oh shoot, um, I have something here like that I can share with people and help people. So that's what really started the me on my journey here.